He's the author of a brand new book, Fauci's Fiction, as you can see right here, how the government and modern medicine missed the boat on COVID-19 from day one. The author is Dr. Michael Schwartz. He sent me a note on social media. Doctor, I don't know if this works for any other morning, so you send him a note on social media. Next thing you know, about 2 days later, you're on the show. How's it going? Good morning.
Great timing, right, Ed?
It is. You think about all that's out there. Tell us the thesis of the book. I mean, we know the big picture, all of us, but Karen and Terrence are going to jump in as well. I'll just start. Why'd you write the book?
So I own 3 different medical clinics, and I'm a research doctor. And we were actually the first company in the state of New Jersey to do a COVID test on March 16th of 2020, culminating into 19,000 patients, 44,000 tests later. And we decided to write a book because the data that we were seeing on the ground was just not matching what you heard in the mainstream media.
How early onto this did you realize there was a problem? How long were we into the pandemic when the light bulb went off?
Probably about a month in, Karen. You know, we had a few hundred patients at that point, and I'm consulting with the folks at the hospital who were telling me gloom and doom stories. But what we were seeing was the opposite. We were seeing that most people had this, didn't know they had it. 90% of my over 4,000 positive patients were asymptomatic completely. And that has to do with a lot of different factors, you know, CT value, viral load, co-infection, and comorbidity. What we saw in the beginning was the sickest of the sick actually had a co-infection to go along with COVID. And you would only realize that by doing what we call a respiratory pathogen panel. There's 31 different things on our respiratory pathogen panel. And we found out that, like I said, the sickest of the sick had COVID and something else. I had a patient about a year ago who had COVID, staph, H-flu, and RSV all at the same time. And if you can imagine if that gentleman went to the Walgreens and got a home test and thought he had COVID, it would have been the worst thing in the world. So you really have to diagnose exactly what you're dealing with.
Dr. Schwartz, how early on did you realize that politics was pushing a specific narrative that wasn't necessarily scientifically based?
Well, Terrence, it kind of made sense very early because, you know, we were trying to put information out there, but we were getting banned right from the start. You know, anytime we put something on Twitter or Facebook, any of the social media platforms, you would see a dramatic decrease in the amount of people who actually saw it. And it seemed like, you know, the federal government, they're on television. The talking heads are all saying one thing. My staff was looking at each other, shaking ours, wondering why they weren't talking about the real data that we were seeing on the ground. It was as if they hadn't consulted with any of the practitioners that were doing this on a daily basis. So the narrative that the CDC and the government were pushing just did not match the data that we were seeing every day.
Incredible. I'm looking at our live chats on Rumble and Getter. On Getter right now, a lot of people are reacting to you and expressing their frustration with Dr. Fauci. But Shar 1776, I think, expresses what all of us think. All talk, slow walk, nothing happens. I mean, it could apply to the FBI story with Chris Wray that we were just talking about. Nobody's held accountable. Hunter's laptop, Chris Wray looking the other way. Here we are with Fauci. He's now retired, making a lot of money in retirement. There was a story in Washington about him buying a big house, and everybody's entitled to a nice retirement, but you also need to be held accountable for what you did while you're in government. I know you're not a politician. I know you're not in law enforcement, but why has nobody really been held accountable? What do we do about this, do you think?
Yeah, and it's funny. I used to be a police officer years ago, so I was in law enforcement. But, you know, I don't know what law applies here. You know, they base everything on a federal emergency, and you can see that, you know, now that they've taken away the federal emergency, the laws have changed for even people getting tested for COVID. But Fauci kind of just goes off into the sunset. And by the way, the book, you know, even though the cover is called, it says the title is Fauci's Fiction, the cover is clearly a depiction of what the face of COVID was. The book itself is not about Fauci. You know, Fauci was the face of COVID, and the depiction on the book is basically the lies that were being told. You know, COVID is very real, and you know, you have to commend Dr. Fauci in the beginning for just kind of coming out and saying, hey, we want to try and tackle this thing. But the way they went about it, it just seemed very fishy from the start. And now that we've gone through 3 years of this, I mean, it's almost blatant corruption at this point. To not talk about, especially the vaccines. I mean, we could talk about all of the patients that are coming back now with issues from the vaccine. I know that you guys have talked about it on your show before, but I see it in droves. It's incredible what we see on a daily basis with folks who are having issues, and specifically from the mRNA vaccines.
Ooh, that's such scary stuff. We talk about that all the time on this show. And I'm intrigued, too, with being in private practice. You were putting stuff out on Twitter and trying to get your message out, obviously, on the show with us today. But you brought up something interesting, which a lot of these pundits are not actual medical doctors that are working in private practice. So you have a good perspective also as a research doctor. How do you get your message out? I mean, coming on here is one thing, but have you found ways to reach out to other people and get this information in the right hands?
Yeah, funny you asked that, Karen. You know, even the book itself, Amazon, if it's listed on Amazon, you think Amazon would want to sell books. Amazon won't even let us promote the book right now because they are citing current events. I've got friends all over the country, baseball players, musicians, you name it, folks that call me up and say, hey, Mike, I can post a picture of my big toe and get 500 likes on it, but I put up your book and I'm getting 2 people that see it. I don't understand the algorithms and why they're still doing this, but somebody does not want to get the message out about COVID. This book tells the story of our 3 years, 19,000 patients, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and what we saw on the ground from day one. It runs from testing, it explains vaccines, it explains what a virus is. You know, still today, we don't speak the same language when it comes to COVID. While one patient is saying one thing, someone else is saying completely, a different story on television. And folks don't know the real deal. This book explains it from A to Z, and I wish everybody would read it. It would really give you a great overview. But at the end of the day, we have years to go before the data comes out and culminates. I constantly tell my patients it'll be years before you hear the truth on vaccines and what COVID really was and how we handled it.
Dr. Schwartz, you collected data, so I want to take a bit of a deep dive into that data. What did you find back then compared to what you're finding today? And I asked that question in the context of our society is much different today than it was 2 years ago when everyone was scared to go outside or touch or talk to anyone. So what has changed? What really has turned the ship for us or turned the tide?
Terrence, it's funny. It's really just the government narrative. I mean, if you look at the advent of the rapid test, that was kind of the end. When COVID stopped being tracked and you don't have any real numbers on it, there's really nothing you can do. And you can kind of see that happened after the election took place. Once Biden got into office and distributed rapid tests to everybody, none of that data, those folks who come back positive on a rapid don't get reported to the government. So the government then doesn't have a narrative to talk about. But really nothing specifically has changed, Terrence. The data was the same right from the beginning. What we found was that, look, COVID is very real. And there's a story there about, where it came from, who developed it, and how it wound up, transmissible. But at the end of the day, 90% of our positive patients were asymptomatic or mild. The death rate on this has come down to probably that of about the flu. And we wouldn't have locked everybody down in a bad flu season. So, I think viewers out there, once they understand the full story, should be very upset, considering the fact that, of all the lockdowns, the businesses that were shut down, the suicide rate, kids that were out of school, the damage that we did from trying to cure this thing was worse than the disease.
So I just want to follow up really quickly. I'm sorry. I want to be clear. So you're saying that we're really in no different situation than we were 2 years ago. It's just the government narrative has changed, and so our reaction to that is different. Is that what I'm hearing?
Terrence, the abundance of COVID right now that we're seeing is incredible. It's through the roof. We're actually having a wave right now. But those folks are the same as the patients that were around 3 years ago. The difference 3 years ago, Terrence, was that we didn't know how to treat it. Flu protocol was flaring it up. We were venting people too early, and it was a novel virus. So once you had that first wave go through, and most of the country, most of the world had caught it, they built up an immunity, a B and T lymphocyte memory response to the virus, which helped them in the long run. But at the end of the day, COVID is out there. It's never going to go anywhere. But we took this thing and we amplified it on a level that has never been seen before when we had early data to show us that, most people survived COVID. Once we figured out the treatment regimen, proning, things of that nature, not using flu protocol, once we kind of figured out how to treat it, the narrative, at least on the treatment spectrum, changed dramatically, but the government didn't seem to really catch up to it.
Interesting.
Incredible.
Dr. Schwartz, are you seeing anything coming down the pike, any future pandemic or anything that our audience should be aware of aside from COVID?
No, you probably have to watch the mainstream media for that one to find out, what they're teasing. No, I really don't. Yeah. I mean, look, we're getting a lot of COVID right now, and it is still out there. I got folks who are sick from it, but like a cold. It's a coronavirus, folks. At the end of the day, COVID, like I said, is very real. But knowing how to treat it now and understanding the facts of how to avoid it, we don't wear masks for virons. That's another great one. There's a whole chapter on masks in the book. I mean, that is probably the second stupidest thing I've ever seen in my career. But the mass vaccination from an untested mRNA vaccine, that one really takes that's the
It's
kicker.
incredible.
It's the number one.
Yeah.
It's the first on the list.
And it's incredible. We got just over a minute, but when you say that we still have high levels of COVID, it's just now we know how to treat it. And back then, the government didn't and overreacted and all that. It's painful for individual people. I just want to read this one from our chat. Leanne says, my cousin died in a hospital with COVID. The respirator killed her. She didn't get ivermectin. And it's so simple and direct and blunt because we were told by the government, you need the ventilators so they could be intubated. And then we're now hearing, and you said this a minute ago before you heard that the respirators killed a lot of people. And then the ivermectin that people on the right were saying, why don't we try this? The government was saying, no, that's crazy, that's crazy, that's crazy. And you hear this from a viewer that their cousin died because they weren't treated right. Last thought.
Yeah, my heart goes out to the viewer, and I sympathize, and I've seen a lot of that. But the ventilators did kill a lot of people very early on. We were venting people way too early, and the cytokine storm was shutting folks' systems down. And you'll find that when you analyze the data in the book. Now that we're in a position where we know how to treat, we don't throw people on vents too early. Most people get over COVID like a small cold. So it's very unfortunate that, honestly, we didn't know what we were doing in the beginning, but we figured it out relatively quick, and we're on a much better path at this point.
All right. Well, we certainly hope so. What a book and great interview. Appreciate it. Good luck with it. It's called Fauci's Fiction, the book on COVID by Dr. Michael J. Schwartz. Doctor, we appreciate you coming in. We'll see you soon, I hope. In the meantime, coming up, we're going to go out to the great state of Nevada, check in with one of our friends, Ambassador Jeffrey Ross Gunter. He's thinking about running for the U.S. Senate. We're going to see what Donald Trump's trip out there was like just a few days ago, the reception he received right after this.
Cocaine in the White House. Cocaine in the White House. Cocaine in the White House.